What are these things? Why do we care? The why do we care would have a blizzard of data slides after it, but I'm going to try to be pretty succinct about it. AAC&U for some years, along with the National Survey of Student Engagement, coming back to 2008 when George Koo began writing about these at the request of Carol Gary Schneider, I might add. That's how that all happened, was Carol calling George and saying, do you guys have any data on what might be most effective? And that's how this began. These are the 11 high-impact practices that we have identified at AAC&U. There's lots of discussion about what the list is and why things are on the list. What I always say, by the way, I also had George Koo once ask, why is there a list and what does it mean to be on the list? So there is that. What we always say, though, is that these are the practices that tend to be the most pervasive and to have the most evidence behind them. That is what I think holds this list together. And frankly, when we call them high impact at this point, so many years, almost 20 years later, in how we talk about high impact practices, what we can point to with a good deal of research and evidence is that they are effective not just for retention and graduation, but they affect a whole range of outcomes, from psychosocial well-being to success in career, to different levels of civic engagement, for example. There's a whole cumulative or comprehensive list of what these outcomes are. We also know from some research that I did with Tia McNair back in 2013 that was actually fabulously updated in 2021. Again, I can point you to all of these resources. We know that students' engagement in multiple high-impact practices tends to yield even more comprehensive effects in what we'd actually call cumulative effects. They seem to get more powerful as students take more of them. And then the last one, this has been really said since the beginning of early days with the National Survey of Student Engagement, and we continue to find that the things that work best for all students also do quite a bit to support our underserved students and their success. In some ways, we have studies, for example, coming out of Cal State Northridge, actually reversed graduation success rates for Latino students as they increased engagement in high impact practices. Just kind of stunning levels of different points of efficacy that range here. So, but here's the, so after all that, lots and lots of good news. But for our discussion today, it occurred to me that there's two things that are at least missing from this picture. One of which is advising and mentoring. That's actually not on the list. And please know I am doing my very best to subvert from within at AAC&U, so that it appears there. I actually think the work of the last 3 years will have a good deal of impact on that. In addition to the fact that going back, Daryl Hatch and Gloria Crisp's work for well over a decade ago at this point has cited advising and mentoring as absolutely something we should be looking at. There was a little book called Relationship Rich Education that is somewhat of a juggernaut in the world of higher education. But yes, I mean, the way that, Peter Felton and Leo Lambert's work, that has tons of resonance and tons of ways that we are thinking about the efficacy of what meaningful mentoring relationships might look like. There's another really important reason that advising and mentoring really ought to be on the list. In addition to the evidence that we know is there, it actually fits in really nicely to when we look at the quality dimensions of what constitutes high impact practices, which at the end of the day is all about what these practices are. If anyone has taught a low-impact service learning course, that would be me. You know that the only thing that unlocks the high impact of any of them are these quality dimensions. These were written about, suggested back in 2013 or so with George Koo and Ken O'Donnell. I quite like Dr. Moore's update of these. In 2023, it's a tighter list, and it does the brilliant job of calling out cultural wealth and the way in which recognizing students' heritage, background, and strengths is an important part of unlocking their engagement in these practices. So I always reference this one as well, but the fact of the matter is we've known for a long time that the quality, and George Koo named it early on, when done well, these can be effective practices. These kinds of maps point us to what is the when done well. And when somebody asks me, well, is this special thing on my campus a high impact practice? This is what I ask them to look at. Well, how much does it do these things? And when, of course, we look at advising and mentoring, we can begin to see that when done well, we will start to see these quality dimensions. So that's another piece of the advising pitch should be there. There's one other thing that's missing about that picture. Let me go back. There's one other thing that's missing about this picture, or one thing that I would suggest is not quite right, and that is the fact that they're all connected. It's a lovely graphic, and you will see it no less than 20 times in this presentation. But it's a striking, there's something subtle about both the picture I started with and this graphic that are actually in contradiction, right? The idea that there was something powerful in 2008 about calling out the group. It wasn't like we didn't know things about learning communities. We knew a lot about learning communities. We knew a lot about service learning by 2008. Writing intensive courses, Capstone had all been looked at. There was almost like decades of literature on some of the high impact practices. What became powerful was looking at them as a group. And that is what the cluster of wires would suggest. But if you look more closely at the picture, and it's exactly why I chose this one, you will see they are separate. They are distinct. And so what is challenging about high impact practices, even as we consider them as a bundle of things, and that students' engagement in them might hit, of course, multiple of these things, which is exactly what Tia and I had found years ago, and Derek Price and Associates also found. But they exist as singular, as usually singular pieces of a student's experience. They exist sometimes as islands of innovation on campuses, the boutique programs that people hold up that maybe a few students encounter, but still like kind of separate and really wholly disconnected. So when we talk about meta-HIPs, and one of the things that I have seen, largely not just from the literature, but also my own engagement on campuses and with campuses, is that there does seem to be a few. And hang with me on this, because this is a new idea, and I am very much workshopping it with this group and with you all now, is I think there's a few that work differently, and that is that they are connectors. They are, in fact, special high-impact practices that connect the others. They are the high-impact practices that, if you add advising and mentoring, facilitate meaning-making for students. They facilitate students' awareness and transparency of the skills that they're developing, and they increase students' sense of purpose of why they're engaged in those. There's a deeper conversation to have here about the actual literature that supports this claim, this hypothesis. But when I talk about high-impact practices now, I start adding this piece. I think we are at a point in our understanding and depth of understanding of these practices that we might think a little differently about how some function. And it's going to be important, in fact, critical to center advising and mentoring in those conversations because it's so powerful in this regard. The final piece, and you're going to hear a lot about this, is, again, the animation, sorry, is that contribution to what we've always called the equity or the equitable outcomes. But here, those three connectors, how we conceive of meta-HIPs actually plays, again, a really powerful role if we begin to think about, and as we should, of equity ultimately at the end of the day being about supporting every student's success through identifying their voice, through elevating their voice, and empowering them to tell their story. And if you go back, in ePortfolio, the ways in which students engage in communities and in advising, those are the pieces that get lifted up. Is the ability for students to find their voice in those practices and expressing that, and then also to tell their story.